Hi, YMCA of Baton Rouge. My name is Mauricio and I'm a registered dietitian for Ochsner and Corporate Wellness. I wanted to show you all a recipe that you can all incorporate during Cinco de Mayo, which is coming up. As you can see on my table, I brought some, ingredients just to show you. When it comes to Mexican cuisine, a lot of people tend to think that it's all about sour cream and cheese and nachos and quesadillas, and it tends to have a lot of saturated fat. So to make it a little bit healthier, we really want to focus on the actual vegetables found very traditionally in Mexican cuisine. Did you all know that salsa is a vegetable? Yes, salsa is just a Spanish word for sauce, but typically most of them are comprised of three ingredients: your red, your white, and your green, which is kind of like the flag of Mexico, right? Your red typically is tomatoes, or sometimes it can be your red chili peppers, like a dehydrated pasilla pepper, which is just this poblano pepper dehydrated into a pasilla pepper. If you make a red sauce, you're typically using these kind of peppers, and I have some red sauce here just to show you. Otherwise, if you're making any kind of the other red salsas, you can also use tomatoes for your red in addition to your dried peppers. For the white, typically we have a lot of Spanish white onions in Mexican cuisine, but also garlic. Garlic tends to be a good ingredient that's used in a lot of Mexican cuisine. And then for green, you see a lot of peppers. So I already showed you the poblano. This little guy is called the jalapeno pepper. And if you ever seen these at the store, these long ones, these are called serrano peppers. So any kind of pepper can be used to make a great, delicious salsa. They vary in levels of heat. Typically, a good rule of thumb, the bigger the pepper, the more mild it is. The smaller the pepper tends to be a little bit more spicy. And I'm talking about width here. So even though this one looks bigger, a serrano is typically smaller in diameter from a jalapeno, so it will be a little bit more spicy. So the levels of spicy will be least spicy, more spicy, most spicy out of these three particular ones. Green can also be your cilantro, and if you're making a green sauce or a salsa verde, typically you're using these little guys, which are called tomatillos. A lot of people confuse them and think that they're tomatoes because they look very similar to a tomato, but they're actually more closely related to an eggplant. So they're not very good to eat raw like you would a tomato. You definitely want to cook these. A salsa verde has the same three ingredients, right? Peppers, onions, and tomatoes. But instead of tomatoes, you use tomatillos, white onions, and the green peppers. So I also want to talk about the types of ingredients that you want to use. Mexican cuisine has a lot of beans, and so if you happen to be cooking from scratch, thumbs up. That is the best way to do it. But if you want to kind of cheat and do some fast things, you can use canned, as long as you try to find as close to possible reduced sodium or no salt added beans. Now the reason why you want to do that is because when you're cooking, you want to be able to season to taste. So you want to control the amount of sodium. When you buy cans that have the normal amount of sodium, what they consider normal, tends to be really, really high. And when you're looking here at the serving size, remember, just because you're looking at this number doesn't mean that that's the number of the container. For example, this can says that there's 3.5 servings per can. So if I'm looking at how much of any of these nutritional values the can has as a total, I would have to multiply any number by 3.5 to get the total. So this one happens to be really low sodium, 10 milligrams of sodium. So times 3.5, that is 350 milligrams of sodium for the whole can, which is pretty good. Most cans you see, and that's because this one particularly, it says no salt. When you're looking at the other kinds of the ones that don't necessarily say no salt added, they tend to have a lot. Say 4, 5, 6, 700 milligrams of sodium times 3.5, and you can start see where it adds up. Another way that you can cut salt is sometimes chips, for example for dips like salsa, bean dips, or guacamole, which is the actual recipe I'm going to make today. You can kind of get lost in how much salt am I getting added from all the different places. So a good kind of way to control that is try to find chips that have no salt added. So this is kind of what these chips look like. This particular brand is making them out of blue corn, so that's pretty cool, right? Or nowadays Another thing I want to talk about is fiber. So it's not just about sodium, but let's focus on fiber. These particular chips, this brand, Benitos, makes them out of rice and beans. So instead of eating your rice and beans, they mash them up and then they bake them to form a chip that looks like this. And so instead of eating corn, which has a little bit of protein, mostly starch, when you have a rice and beans, you have a lot more fiber and a little bit more protein. So protein and fiber, great sources of nutrition, especially for your Mexican holidays. It does not have to be about high-calorie, fatty foods like cheese and sour cream. So let's make guacamole. Again, as I said, that's today's recipe. When you're choosing an avocado, you typically find different kinds at the grocery store. And it doesn't necessarily, in terms of ripeness, it doesn't mean that if it's greener, it's going to be less ripe, and if it's darker, it's going to be more ripe. Color has nothing to do with ripeness. The actual way to determine how ripe an avocado is going to be through touch. So you're going to want to pick one up and slightly give it a squeeze. Not a hard squeeze, just a light squeeze. And out of these, I think this one is very hard, this one is kind of medium, and this one has just a light touch. Again, you want a light squeeze ability. You don't want a harsh, kind of very, very mushy. If you ever pick up an avocado and it's very mushy, by definition, you should already be able to tell that it's going to be dark and kind of black inside. So, now that I know this is going to be my perfect avocado, this is the one I'm going to use for my recipe. I'm going to start off with garlic. So I have 1 clove of garlic here. And by the way, this is just a mortar and pestle. In Spanish, we call it molcajete. And that's what I'm going to use to make my guacamole. So I'm start off with a clove of garlic, and I'm just going to go to town and mash it. Now, garlic has a lot of that kind of garlic oil and juice in there, so as soon as I crush it, it starts to smell a lot like garlic, right? So to get a little bit extra juice, I am going to add salt, but a very little amount. So I'm using today some kosher salt, and I'm just adding, that was about maybe 1/8 of a teaspoon, if that. And I'm just mushing my garlic. The salt is going to not only give it flavor, but also draw out some of the moisture from the garlic so that it can be incorporated into our guacamole sauce. Alright, now that you're good and ready, I'm going to add my avocado. So my avocado is this one. The way I like to do avocados to kind of get it open is to cut it in half first. For the people that are kind of novice at avocados, you definitely want to use a cutting board. But if you're a little bit more advanced, you can cut it in your hand. If you're a kid, children, do not cut an avocado in your hand, okay? Always use a cutting board. So I'm going to show you how to use a cutting board for an avocado. There is one seed in the center of an avocado, it's called the pit. So you're going to want to put it flat against the cutting board. Put your knife against it, and instead of moving the knife, notice how I'm just going to keep my knife there. I'm going to turn my avocado 360 degrees, and that's it. Now I can put my knife down. There should be a complete cut all along that pit so that I can just twist and open. And ta-da, this is a really perfect ripeness here. I'm going to go ahead and squeeze this avocado in here. If it's really underripe, you might not be able to do this kind of squeeze method. But this is just what I'm doing today to show you don't actually have to touch the avocado. Alright, and my second one, to get the pit out, I'm going to show you a little advanced technique. And again, if you're a child, please don't try this at home, or have a parent supervisor with you. You can just kind of give this a light tug, twist it, and then the pit comes out in your knife, and you can go ahead and do the same thing with here. You might have seen this process at a Mexican restaurant. If you order tableside guacamole, they typically do this very fast in front of you, because the fresher the ingredients, the better the guacamole is. No offense to those supermarket guacamoles, but typically to make it so that the guacamole stays green for a long time, they are going to have to add a lot of either vinegar or oil, and so it tends to not be super fresh tasting, just FYI. The best guacamole is always fresh. Recipe can vary depending on where you are, but traditionally guacamole just has peppers, cilantro, lime, and avocados. That's the basic recipe. If you want to get a little bit fancy, you can add other things like onions and tomatoes and garlic. Some people are very, no, you can never add tomatoes to guacamole. kind of purist or traditionalist. Some people like me, the more veggies the better, right? So all veggies are I'm inclusive. So all I'm doing here now is just mashing my avocado in my garlicky salted molcajete. I'm gonna go ahead and add my cilantro in here, which I already pre-chopped. Add it in here. I'm gonna add a little bit of pepper, and this is just raw pepper because I like my guacamole a little bit spicy. If you want to calm down the spiciness of a pepper, make sure that when you're cutting it open, you just take away some of that membrane and the seeds. That's what actually carries the most heat, not necessarily the skin. So if you want to take a little bit spice down, you can take away some of that center. If you want it super spicy, just go ahead and keep the center. I'm going to add, again, a little bit of onion in here because I'm an equal opportunity, all veggies. And I'm going to add a little bit of tomato. Notice that tomato is always going to add a little bit of liquid. So I'm going to have to judge that in accordance with my lime as well. So I have my peppers, onions, and tomatoes, which are actually the basic ingredient for a pico de gallo. If you ever heard that word or that kind of name, that's just basically what that means. Peppers, onions, tomato, a little lime juice, a little cilantro. So I have my lime juice. I have some limes right here. I'm going to use this little lime squeezer to make my life easier. That was just half of one. Maybe I'll do a full lime. So another half, 2 halves equals 1. And I'm going to go ahead and mix it. Because avocados have a lot of fiber, they actually are able to absorb and incorporate that liquid throughout. So they're not going to be separated. You can add a lot of water to a guacamole and it just makes it softer, but you won't see it kind of like a separated water and vegetables. It's going to stay really, really creamy. And voila! That's my guacamole. Fresh tableside guacamole. I'm going to enjoy this with some rice and bean chips. Because this has sodium already, and I did add a little bit of sodium in here, I'm going to have to be mindful of how much of this portion I'm going to be having. Typically, tableside guacamole, you don't want to have a full tableside guacamole for one person. Even though avocados have a lot of healthy fats, they can also pack a lot of calories. So just be a little bit mindful of that. Try to change your fats from saturated, which are those animal fats, to unsaturated, more of those plant fats like avocados. Focus on protein, focus on fiber, and reducing that sodium. All in all, you are going to have a great Cinco de Mayo. That's delicious.